You are now listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. So we're going to talk about America bombing, destroying the alleged nuclear production facilities, the nuclear weapons production facilities, and the potential of taking out actual nuclear weapons. Now, this has been discussed and warned about for a long, long time. In fact, I had many conversations about this that I really can't discuss at length with a friend of mine, General Shimon Aram, one of Israel's most famous generals, and he was playing a key position all the way back when the Jews were escaping Germany, and they were taking ships into Israel. And in 1948, they were doing like what was called an exodus. The Jewish people were fleeing Europe, fleeing Germany, and they were taking large ocean vessels to the nation of Israel, where they resettled, which, by the way, that particular event that I just described to you has been predicted in Bible prophecy in numerous locations throughout the Old Testament specifically and in the New Testament. And it's just one out of 100 proofs, at least, of the Bible's supernatural reliability, especially when it comes to prophecy. And one of the key themes of prophecy, by the way, is Israel in prophecy. I taught at Jack Hayford's King's College and Seminary for like 20 years. And I was a professor that taught Bible prophecy or eschatology. I taught ecclesiology, which is the study of the church. And then I also taught courses like Israel and prophecy. So, I don't approach this program with I'm not a complete novice when it comes to this subject. But General Shimon Aram was at every major battle and war that happened in Israel ever since they left Europe and resettled in Israel and Jerusalem. He was there war after war. And, obviously he was restrained as to what he could say to me. And I don't want to know what I'm not supposed to know, because knowing what you are not supposed to know just gets you into trouble. So that's a safeguard that I didn't mind, to be quite honest with you. But I was aware of the fact that he knew the inside story of so many things. Now, I will say this, because I asked him about this, and it was his contention, which is probably not surprising to a number of you. It was his contention that Iran was either, had all the materials and could assemble nuclear weapons very quickly, or at that time, Israel believed that Iran had indeed nuclear weapons. So when I hear people guffawing and, being shocked over the idea that Israel knows and America claims to know that Iran has all kinds of nuclear materials that would be a prerequisite for building nuclear weapons and nuclear missiles and nuclear bombs, that shouldn't surprise anybody unless you're completely spaced out of your mind. Because they were talking about that. Let's see, Are You Ready? I think I wrote in 2013. So well before 2013, they were talking about, and I talked about it in my books, like Are You Ready? The potentiality of Iran having nuclear weapons. Okay, so it's amazing. The local, I thank God I ran across some statistics, because I was really getting bothered by being besieged by the local network news channels in Southern California, which are they're an abomination, because they are propaganda organs for whoever owns them. And if you can, and plus the people that are the on-screen people, you can't call them journalists. All they do is read talking points from a teleprompter or some kind of digital screen. They themselves know absolutely nothing. And it's very apparent when they talk. Their commentary is abysmal, because there's nothing in their commentary, because they don't know anything. So how can you have commentary or make comments when you're speaking from an intellectual void? So I find them very disgusting, because they're always hammering away at their propaganda points. Despite the facts, despite the truth, they're going to stay on course like complete prostitutes, abandoning the truth. And so many of our mainstream media and alternative media does the same thing. And I'm going to say this to you, and I've said it a lot relatively recently. Don't be fooled. Right before your very eyes, there has been one of the biggest coups in the battle zone of psyops or psychological operations or psychological warfare. Basically, the deep state, or whatever you want to call them, completely bamboozled, fooled conservatives, right-wing, Christians, people like that, completely fooled them. And how they fooled them was everybody saw the crash of these super liberal, anti-American news networks and publications, etc. It was like embarrassing to watch CNN go into a massive meltdown. It was embarrassing to watch other channels go into a meltdown. And so what happened was what is often referred to as the mainstream media essentially collapsed to a significant degree. And they were the authors of their own demise. I would repeatedly say to people that I know, this is going back 2 decades ago, I was constantly saying, I don't understand a lot of these news networks, a lot of these media outlets. I don't understand them because it's obvious they're not operating according to the traditional business model in capitalism. So in capitalism, the traditional business model is you're selling a product or a service. You need customers, so you find customers. You win customers over through a variety of means. Everybody understands that. But when you would watch the behavior of CNN or MSNBC and many of these other channels, they acted like they didn't even need advertisers. And that was bizarre. They acted as if they were not even accountable to their advertisers. They showed absolutely no concern about whether or not they were going to, on a regular basis, deeply offend at minimum 50% of their watching or listening audience. They would just do everything they could to offend, alienate, and drive away, again, a minimum of 50% of their audience. Because they would champion these outrageously biased news stories that were all designed to attack conservatives, Trump, Republicans, et cetera, et cetera. And yet every poll would say, and this is going back a number of years, every poll would say that those people that they were alienating represented at minimum 50% of their audience. So who anywhere starts a business in any industry, in any service industry, in any kind of business, who is it anywhere that can afford to, when you're trying to run a business, your goal is to generate profits, either for a privately held corporation or generate profits for your stockholders. The idea is to make more money in terms of profit than the money you spend. So it's because we live in America too, we live in a highly competitive marketplace. People are in constant economic warfare with one another, where under the normal principles of capitalism, you would do everything you can to expand your so-called market reach. You would expand your market reach. You would generate entirely new customers. And in addition to generating new customers, you would actively go after retaining your existing customers. Because all the customers that you're generating them for the goal of generating profits, bringing in cash flow, bringing in money, so you can expand and get more customers. And no business that prior to this that started around, 2002, 2003, it began to really take off. Prior to this, I had never seen, observing American society, observing the media, etc., I had never seen a just flat out in the open, in your face, insulting, attacking, denigrating your customers, 50% of your audience, and behaving and doing shows and allowing your host to make commentary that did nothing less than viciously attack your audience base. And I never saw that before because it never happened before. So it became very obvious to me early on that these media outlets, the mainstream media, the mainstream entertainment media, and all the other mainstream corporations, from fast food places where they would spend their advertising dollars, that they got together in a unified action. And together in a unified action, all these different companies and corporations almost made it a policy, without exception, to ruthlessly attack conservatives, Christians, Christian values, conservative values, with no concern at all for the ramifications. So you don't even have to know anything about economics to know that means you're not generating cash flow. You're not making money. You're losing money. Because if all you're doing is producing programming, etc., that is driving away your customers or driving away your audience, you cannot possibly be generating the income you need to make money. So you are completely in the twilight zone and violating egregiously every principle of business and principle of capitalism. And I would watch this and my mouth would hang open. In the beginning of this was when I was a regular commentator and debater on the biggest shows on the Fox News Network and the Fox Business Channel in their glory days. They are no longer even remotely in their glory days. But to give you an example, when I would go on a Fox News Network show, I would go on the biggest shows, or a Fox Business Channel show, I'd go on the biggest shows. And it was pretty much guaranteed that I would be speaking to about somewhere between 5.8 million people and 6.3 million people per appearance or per show. That's why when I tell you I was reaching, X amount of millions of people, there's no reason to doubt that, because if you forget all the other media I was on, including CNN in its golden days, if you forget all the other media I was on, just sampling Fox News Channel, Fox Business Channel, CNN, just sampling those networks, and let's say on average I was reaching 6 million people per show, you multiply that by the large numbers of appearances I made each year over a period of over 10 years. And you have, I'm not going to even get out a calculator. You got probably 300 million people that I talked to right there, because the numbers were massive. Now, the mainstream media collapsed because the attack against Trump and conservatives, it basically cemented the problem that they created. They alienated their audiences. They drove away their audiences in record numbers. They don't even have half of the audience they used to have. It's so low, it's ridiculous. So let's say they have 3/4 less of an audience, and I think that's being generous. But let's be generous in the era. They have 75% less viewers. Okay, so big upheaval in mainstream media. Now, same thing happened to the movie industry and TV industry, etc. The question is being thrown out now, is Hollywood dead? And it's a legitimate question, because Hollywood is continuing to make the same mistake in music, films, and TV that the cable news networks made. And that is, they're totally offending, rejecting, and driving away their target audiences and forcing their target audiences to have stuff shoved in their faces and their children's faces that their target audience and their children find highly offensive. They don't want to have stuff shoved in their face or preached at, regarding whatever woke idea somebody's clinging to. They're not interested in it. So what happened was, the entire media landscape right now, so you can't listen to the propaganda channels, because like the local networks, they just lie. And if you believed what they said, you would have a completely distorted viewpoint of what's going on in the country. So whenever I talk to anybody, I can tell in 2 minutes who that individual is listening to or watching in terms of their media choices. Because I've discovered inevitably, whatever source a person is listening to in the media, that becomes the total belief system of the individual or individuals watching that media source. I mean, in the old days, there used to be, that didn't used to be true. People, to whatever degree, it could have been to a lesser degree, but people attempted to think for themselves. They would occasionally question the propaganda, and they would be resistant to the propaganda. Well, that was all gone out the window. It's no longer true. So people in America, for example, beginning decades ago, lost their capacity to think. So we have a number of generations of Americans that have completely lost their capacity to think. And as such, they are like, and I don't want to sound offensive, but they're functional parasites attached to disintegrating media networks that just pump out Orwellian narratives or propaganda all day long. So, for example, I saw a clip of a new Iron Man. You all know Iron Man. The original Iron Man, the first movie, or maybe the first two movies, maybe even the first three movies. I stopped watching it, I think, at the second movie. But Robert Downey Jr. starred in the first couple of Iron Man feature films, blockbuster hits. Okay, they've come a long way, baby, from that. Now I'm watching the Iron Man television series, and it is so woke and so poorly written that it is a dysfunctional jungle of woke narratives, promotion of transgender, promotion of this, anti-American, anti-materialism, pro-communism. And now they have some girl from, I guess, the inner city of Chicago. So they reinvented Iron Man. Iron Man is no longer a man. He's no longer white. He's now an African-American girl who came from Chicago. And I don't really care what race Iron Man or Iron Woman is. That's not the beef. The beef is the whole show is nothing more than a propaganda piece of wokeism. So parents are not going to let their children, most parents are not going to let their children watch this. So it's going to collapse. Hundreds of millions of dollars have already been spent on this show, and it's going to collapse. Right now, movies are collapsing, and hundreds of millions of dollars are being flushed down the toilet because, once again, the media companies have decided to totally violate capitalist principles of business, which all revolve around meeting your customers' needs. And when you meet your customers' needs, then you can earn a profit. Okay, so where does that take us? It takes us to right now. So if you were to just suck up all your information from a distorted media, this is the one thing that I need to add. Amidst this dynamic of propaganda wars, there's something that is emerging. It's been in play for a while. The overwhelming majority of people in alternative media are newbies. They just got on the bus relatively recently. The things that I've been talking about for 40 years, they have just begun to learn about that stuff. Literally 3 years ago, if you said Illuminati to these people, or Luciferian elite, or all the other words that I've been using for decades, they would have reacted with anger, called me a conspiracy theorist. And this is probably the majority of players that exist in alternative media right now. They're newbies. They found an opportunity. They secretly wanted to be social media stars. I never wanted to be a social media star. It wasn't even in my head. I was just using social media as a tool for communication. Okay, so they would raid shows like mine and other people's shows, people who knew what they were talking about. But they're so new. When you listen to the monologue, they fall all over themselves because they don't really know their subject matter. They're faking it. And besides that, they've only been in this new realm of study for 2, maybe 3 years at most. So I'm glad that they switched sides. I'm glad, if it's sincere, I'm glad that they finally saw the light. I mean, I'm happy for that. I'm very happy for it. But the problem is their analysis and leadership becomes both shallow and non-existent. They can't lead because they have no power to lead. They can't lead because they have no knowledge to lead. So what you will discover when you look at it and use your God-given perception is that this entire alternative media and all the new alternative media channels are not what they appear to be. The vast majority of the alternative media channels that everybody's raving about was simply a planned strategy to separate conservatives, Christians, right-wingers. I'm talking about sane right-wingers. It was simply a way to separate them from the general population so that whatever truth or whatever level of truth they did have, it would have been walled off from the general population. So alternative media was a strategic move. Alternative media, you really got to get this. And you won't hear this analysis anywhere else. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've been making analyses, I can't even pronounce it, that have been way ahead of the curve, year after year after year, like the one I'm giving you now. And the reason I'm able to do that is I do my homework. I've done my homework and I do my homework. So this alternative media exists. It's not what it thinks. It's not what you think it is. People mistakenly think that it's a solution, hallelujah, we've taken back the media. No, you're absolutely wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. Alternative media is this. Now listen very carefully and help spread the word. And then, which will happen inevitably and rather quickly, there are people who listen to the program. They will steal the fundamental ideas because they're original and they're true. And then they'll start claiming it as their own. And you know what? I let go. I let go of that completely because ultimately, to me, it doesn't matter who gets the credit. It matters most is the truth getting out there. So if the truth is getting out there, then I let go of it. It's in God's hands. The truth is getting out there. That is more important than did Paul get the credit. But you need to understand something, and you need to be realistic. In order to keep funding a communication system like Paul McGUIRE Ministries and the Paul McGUIRE Report, in order to keep funding this outreach, this truth, it is necessary because we live in the real business world. We live in the world of actual responsibility, the necessity of generating dollars to fund your outreach, to fund your ministry, to fund your communication. So it is imperative. It is absolutely necessary. It has to be done, or you're going to violate the laws of business, and then you're going to come crashing down or become extinct quickly. You have to understand that because of the way our world and monetary system works, and mostly because of the way cash flows and money flows throughout social media, throughout the internet, and throughout alternative media and mainstream media, there's a unique dynamic, a unique travel path, if you will, by which money flows, money is controlled, and how the whole social media and internet system actually operates. Now, I'm not trying to condescend, but this could be, for some of you, you're getting what I say like really quickly, and I appreciate it. But I'm trying to also make it simple enough so that the people who need to know and the people who are hungry to know get an opportunity to grow in their knowledge. Okay, so the basic way the internet works now with the artificial creation known as mainstream media and the other artificial creation known as alternative media. And what you need to understand is that alternative media, which is in the full sense of the word, a collection of people that might be composed of libertarians, conservatives, sane right-wingers, Christians, and maybe liberals that are in the process of changing to be more moderate and eventually conservative. That's the umbrella by which alternative media exists. But the purpose of the vast, overwhelming majority of hosts of alternative media programs, the new self-appointed celebrities of alternative media, the new rising stars, if you will, of alternative media, plus all the ordinary people in alternative media, combined, probably 95% of them really don't fully understand what's going on. They don't understand how they're being played and they're being used. And they just learned about the stuff that you and I have been talking about for the last 40 years. They've just learned in the last several years. So what they are, they don't even understand this. So they can't come forward and give this analysis because they can't think that deep, because they don't study, they don't read, they haven't experienced. And I'm not putting them down for that. But in most of them, not all of them, but in most of them, the desire to be a star, the desire to be a social media star or an internet star and generate a lot of money is their primary motivation. That's their real goal. To give you truth that will set you free is way down on their list. And you say, well, how do you know that? All I have to do is watch their programs and listen to their programs a number of times. And I do that. I sample stuff on different social media platforms all the time. And I sample the content. I listen to what the hosts are saying. And it doesn't take very long to figure out, especially when you've been doing this like I have for 40 years. It doesn't take very long to figure out whether the given host or hostesses or the given social media star or whatever, whether they're for real or they're just in it for the money, whether they're really agents for the deep state, to be blunt, and they're masquerading like conservatives, they're masquerading like sane right-wing people. It doesn't take long to know who they really are if you use discernment and listen to their words. Some of them are purely hack political operatives, and they're being funded under the table or through a network. They're being funded. Many of the alternative media stars are being funded by major political parties, primarily the Republican Party, and they're part of a national Republican Party social media movement, just like way back in the days of Rush Limbaugh. Rush told a lot of truth, but Rush, in addition to all the truth that Rush Limbaugh spread, which was good, he also covered up a lot of stuff that was truth and diverted a lot of stuff that was important for people to know. So don't think for a moment that the rise of Rush Limbaugh from nothing and his show in the Empire State Building. I remember, the first year that Rush Limbaugh took off, and I heard him, and back then he was the only thing going, at least that you could get on channels everywhere. But you got to understand, Rush Limbaugh didn't get to where he was due to pure talent. And I'm not saying he wasn't talented, he was. But Rush Limbaugh also, it was obvious, he was an agent of the Republican Party because he was always in lockstep with the Republican Party. Now, we have the same phenomenon going on right now all over alternative media. I shouldn't say without exception, with very few exceptions, the overwhelming majority of people that have the biggest numbers and the biggest audiences in alternative media are secretly being funded and promoted and secretly being risen up by the Republican Party and its network of millionaires, billionaires, and all. There's a massive pool of flowing money that will be distributed to given talk show hosts on alternative media if they become MAGA or Republican operatives. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of those positions. However, this is how it works out. Number one, advertising dollars are driven to select social media hosts, internet hosts in the alternative media. And these advertising dollars are really, in effect, cash flow or the financing of a counter movement to the Democratic socialist movement trying to take over our nation. So this money is pouring, it's making a lot of people in social media, in the alternative media, wealthy. Now, I'm not going to name people's names because that's not what I do. And, this is not a black and white situation. It happens to be that I might agree with a lot of the things these people say. In fact, I do. Not all of it, but I agree with a lot of it. But the problem is the way the economics of alternative media is set up. First and foremost, you have, like Rumble. Rumble showcases and highlights and actually promotes people supposedly based on their numbers. They get when you get the front page of Rumble on the internet and your show is playing live or you're playing live on Rumble, automatically as people go to Rumble, that positioning is worth countless millions of dollars because that positioning, front page, top of the page, gives you a superior position to expand the viewers and watchers of your show. It gives you a superior position for your advertisers to make money. It gives you a superior position and vantage point to draw advertisers into your show to finance your show and finance you. And that you could go down the list of conservative alternative media. Okay. So that puff, that artificial promotion can make or break somebody. Now, notice, so I sample these shows. Again, I might agree with a number of things that they're saying. Their analysis is always two-dimensional. But they have become very, very sophisticated in learning how to manipulate specifically the evangelical Christian audience. And they have the evangelical Christian audience and the Christian audience in their hip pocket. They own them. They have, just like the military intelligence has, just like when they want to, the Democratic Party has, and yes, the people behind the alternative media stars, they have learned how to capture the minds of evangelical Christians. They've learned the buzzwords, they've learned the vocabulary, they've learned the Bible, they've learned the cultural distinctives like the arguments of the timing of the rapture. They have learned it all. And then, I can't prove it, but I know it's there because it was there in the past, and I can prove it through deduction. I see all the time what I perceive, because I've been at the highest levels of the game in the media industry for decades of my life. Okay? So I've been on the inside as well as I've been on the outside. But I made a choice, and I'm not saying I'm better than anybody for making the choice. I made a choice after 10 years of hosting a very successful, nationally syndicated, probably the most popular nationally syndicated Christian talk radio program in the nation for 10 years. And then I was also for 10 years the darling, if you will, of independent commentators and debaters and guest experts on the Fox News Network, Fox Business Channel, and CNN on the biggest shows on a regular basis. And then I was in the second wave of the internet. So that means I had my own internet presence long before most people even knew what the internet was. And that was only by God's grace, because I would have missed that boat. Like all the people who did miss the boat, I would have been among them. I would have missed the boat regarding opportunities on the internet and social media for communication. The only reason I didn't was God was looking out for me in the form of a person who became a friend of mine, was a live guest on my radio show. His wife was a live guest on my radio show. And that individual that I'm talking to you about was Chuck Missler, who's now gone on to be with the Lord. Chuck Missler, the famous communications intelligence executive, very popular prophecy teacher. We became friends. He was on my show constantly. He would come by because we were physically, geographically in the same orbit, and we knew the same people, and our theology was very similar. But because Chuck Missler was in the computer industry before anybody knew what the computer industry was, I learned from him what I needed to do and what I needed to understand in order to get in on the second wave of the internet. And he was in the second wave too. The first wave was the first, and Al Gore, he's not nothing to do with it. But Al Gore, forget about Al Gore, he's a liar. The first wave of the internet was the actual tech people themselves, you know, and that was about it. And it was a very small community of people. The second wave, which is what I got in on because of Chuck Missler, I established while I was still dominating a huge spectrum of listeners on AM and FM radio, and taking away and eroding the audience of big-time secular talk show hosts like, I forgot their names for crying out loud. The whole field is such an illusion. In any case, I got in on the second wave of the internet while I was still hosting this nationally syndicated AM and FM radio show, which was played everywhere. And it was ridiculous. It was God. Believe me, it was God. Because I would often be on, like, all of Northern California, from Bakersfield up to Oregon. I would be on a station where often they would play me 2-3 hour, my show twice. So they played the 3-hour show live, and then they played the 3-hour show live again, all during drive time. And that, believe me, I talked to everybody on the air live. The influence and impact, there's no way, unless you know something about demographics and radio signals and the market that was happening, there's no way you could understand the absolutely massive outreach God gave me. It was unprecedented in the history of radio, literally. And it wasn't because of a genius on my part. I saw the opportunity and went with it, but it wasn't because of my genius. It was the Lord. To be on 6 hours a day in all of Northern California, and then to be on 3 hours a day in all of Southern California, and then they'd replay my shows constantly over the weekends, and the same thing would happen in other markets, other major markets all across the country. It was crazy. So that's why Fox began wooing me, and Fox News, because they wanted to get some of my audience to become Fox watchers. All right, this is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. We'll be back in just a second. Once again, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. This is Paul McGuire. Okay, so this goes back a number of decades. Now, there was a lot more to this story, and I just want to stay on the main subject here. Back then, a lot of the people, not all of them, but a significant percentage of the people who are in alternative media today, they were very young. I mean, really, there's an age spectrum here. They were still in high school or something. There were a lot of soccer moms and moms, because I targeted them, who would deliberately turn my show on so their kids would be exposed to the ideas in my show while they were driving them to and from school. And that's not an easy thing in major markets. There's usually a lot of traffic. So what I would have, a couple of generations of young adults or younger listening to my program on a regular basis. And it was instilling in them a biblical worldview. Now, that didn't happen by accident. I educated the soccer moms on how they could do that from their car. And I made sure that intertwined with my programs, that I would produce and host programs that would not be boring to young people of all ages. And I would get calls from moms constantly, all across the nation, soccer moms, who were playing my show out loud, and you could hear a bunch of kids in the car. And many of those kids grew up. Some of them were a little bit older, but they grew up. I'm not saying we reached all of them, but we reached a percentage of them, and they learned the basics. Because when I was talking, back then, way back then, nobody with Alex Jones was still taking off, and he had an aggressive audience of kind of like-minded people, and he did a lot to develop that audience. But he didn't have the soccer moms and he didn't have the Christians like I did. And because they didn't understand just how many of those people there are. I did understand because I was one of those people, a Christian who was raised in an atheist household. Okay, so when I would talk about conspiracy, what they called conspiracy theories back then, okay, people were like Christians were like, they were like encountering psychological shock waves when they would hear my program because I was intelligent, I was well researched, I knew how to rein it in so I wouldn't terrify people, and I educated a huge number of people and a huge number of young people. I educated into understanding a biblical worldview and how to apply a biblical worldview to the fact that whether you know it or not, you're living in a scientific dictatorship in the mode of Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World. I would talk about the deep state, the Luciferian elite, globalism, the globalist elite. I would expose the Federal Reserve and on and on and on and on. But back when I was saying it, Alex Jones was saying it, and they were crucifying him on a regular basis. There were a number of other people saying it in different mediums and markets, but there weren't that many of us. So we were the seed planters. Now, and we took, the first people to hit the beach in a military invasion. We took the heat big time. And I won't go into it. I don't need any violence played for me. But most of the people that I know that hit the beach at the same time, they took the heat big time, in ways that many of you will never know. So it was never a game for us. The people who hit the beach first, it was not popular at all. It was not prestigious at all to say what we were saying. It provoked a very boomerang reaction. But we won, you see, because we were forced to use our imaginations, because we didn't have the deep pockets of the mainstream media. But we kept at it, we kept at it, we kept at it, we kept at it. And gradually, we won to a significant degree the battle for the minds of new generations and the battle for the minds of America. I'm not saying we won the whole war and that everything changed. But prior to that, there was nothing. There was no spiritual occupational forces to hit the beach at all, except for us. And when I say us, it could be 100 or 1,000 people. I don't know. At least 100. If you want to talk about effective ones, maybe 50. I mean, when I say effective, I'm talking about super effective. And I include myself in that number and others, some who you probably know. So now you have this alternative media. And this is the master strategic stroke from the deep state. They create the alternative media with the fundamental agenda of destroying people like me and all the other truth tellers who were the first people to hit the beach. Because people in military intelligence, yes, people in intelligence agencies, not all of them, but a significant percentage of them, they were not neutral to our pro-God, pro-America. We're not for globalism. We're for traditional moral values. One would think that our intelligence agencies and our military intelligence would have wanted to prop up or promote people that were promoting that biblical, Christian, traditional American viewpoint. Don't you think? But no, as we who hit the beach early discovered, and it took us all a long time to figure this out. How come these people are attacking us? How come the people that should be supporting us the most are attacking us? Because, as we found out and we communicated to the rest of the nation, a significant percentage of the people that were attacking us were really operatives, not for we the people of America. They were operatives not for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They were operative not for the biblical truths of the Old Testament and the New Testament. They were operatives that believed in and wanted to promote, per their orders, a liberal, socialist, Marxist, globalist, New Age, anti-Christian, pro-one world government, pro-one world religion, pro-one world economic system worldview. You see the distinction? They pretended, and exploited the stupidity of a lot of people in America, but they pretended that they were on our side. But in actuality, they were the agents of chaos and still are to a large degree. They were the agents of chaos. So going back, and they're not stupid. They were never stupid. And they paid the price to learn a lot of things that a lot of people weren't paying attention to. So, for example, they learned that the reason for Paul McGUIRE's explosive growth and expansion and his effectiveness in communicating, and the other people who were speaking truth to power, the reason for their explosive growth and their effective communication, and I'm speaking of the ones that really made an impact. And you got to understand that these intelligence analysts were carefully studying, reading our books, hearing and listening and watching and taping very carefully our language, our appeals, our philosophical belief system, our patriotism, our worldview, our spiritual beliefs, our cultural beliefs, and so on and so forth. They were studying us with the intensity that the communist Chinese intelligence agencies would study Americans, or how the Russian communist intelligence agencies would study us with an incredible zeal, because they want to understand how we were doing something right. They wanted to understand it so they could beat it. It's a scary proposition, by the way. Well, nobody's ever told you the truth. The people who should be telling you the truth don't possibly know, because most of them picked up whatever they learned from us over the last 20 years, if they're that old. Or they're operatives of the deep state, or they're wolves in sheep's clothing. Many of them are just naive and are being used. But don't kid yourself. When you're getting, $15,000, $25,000, $100,000 a month in advertising revenues from the social media company where advertisers choose to advertise on your show, you know what you had to do to get that $100,000 a month in financing. And the people who really kick it up can make $1 million a month. And some of them are. But if you look and examine carefully, every single one of the alternative media giants, the ones that are benefiting from the massive infusion of advertising dollars, they have the same content formula. It's cookie cutter content formula. They give a small dash of conspiracy theory, Illuminati, Luciferian elite, Bilderberg Group, the Great Reset, the Federal Reserve, the truth that most of the Republican Party are globalists and internationalists and basically despise Christians and are betraying our country. These people, they soft pedal all that, or they don't talk about it at all. Then when it comes to the deliberate subjects that will cause if you talk about certain topic content areas, it's guaranteed you will get no advertising dollars, no preferential treatment, no placement on the top of the page. You will be harassed, demonized, and they will aim their guns at you. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the truth. It doesn't matter how politely or with what integrity you're talking about. If you want to make the big money in alternative media and be an alternative media star, then you have to be prepared to sell your soul and sell out, because that's the price tag, baby. It's the same price tag that it was in the mainstream media, mainstream music, mainstream film, acting, television, all the mainstream communication centers. If you won't sell your soul and toe the party line, you're not going to be given the keys to their Luciferian kingdom. You're just not. Wake up and smell the coffee. They know how to play us because they've studied us, and they've studied us not like a bunch of amateurs studying us. They actually have military intelligence. I've read stories about this. A guy who would read Christian prophecy book bestsellers, working for Army intelligence, Army military intelligence. I've read his reports. He's fluent. He's highly fluent in his understanding of Bible prophecy, the nuances within the evangelical culture. Yet he's using his talents and abilities to control us and to potentially break us. Okay? They're supposed to be defending us. They're supposed to be defending America, defending the Constitution, defending life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what's supposed to happen. Okay, so back to the so you're not allowed to say this, but I say it all the time. If you listen to my program, I say stuff all the time, and it costs me big time. You don't hear me getting out my violin and whining about it. It costs me everything, and I won't tell you what everything means. And it costs others everything, and I won't tell you what it means for them. So I pay a huge price for doing what I'm doing. Whereas others are making millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars and are being promoted. Why? Because when I went to Fox News Network and the Fox headquarters in Manhattan, New York City, where I did a bunch of shows live from their Manhattan studios, but I also met the head of the guy who hires the new, soon-to-be big-time television, on-screen television commentators. Okay, I met with him in his office, where we discussed the possibility of me getting my own regular show on Fox News. This was in the golden days of Fox. So we talked for a while, and it's you do the corporate dance, you disclose, you exhibit charm, but you're careful about what you disclose. Meanwhile, you know darn well that they've already done research on you. They knew I was a Christian. They knew I was intensely interested in Bible prophecy. They knew all that. And they were willing to take a risk on me because their audience loved me, and the ratings would skyrocket when I would appear. And I would turn boring programs into electrically charged programs because I had to prove myself. They were all on cruise control. Okay. Now, I believe that door did not open, not because I wasn't good enough, not because I wasn't talented enough. I was told by big producers and big talent at Fox and some of their biggest advertisers, I was told constantly in private conversations, one-on-one, I was told by the biggest players in the radio, television, news media business, I was constantly told by people that would know and should know, you're as good as, and they'd name some superstar conservative media talk show host. You're better than, and they would name some conservative talk show host on radio or television. And I would hear that over and over again. So it wasn't just my delusionary imagination. So if I was better than a lot of the best, which I was, that's not according to me, it's according to people that know, insiders. If I was better than the best, how come the door didn't open for me? I'll tell you why. Because I've been through this before when I was in the film business. Because I originally came to Hollywood to be in the feature film business. But I learned that unless there are little tests you're given to see if you're going to be one of them, if you're going to march the party line, they can pick it up. They're very shrewd. They don't come out and ask. They sense it. And so I didn't get certain things, had nothing to do with the movies that I produced, because I wasn't trying to, at one point I was trying to sell the movies I produced, but at another point I was trying to sell my talent as a promoter and marketer and packager of feature films, of which I was very successful, independent of some of the films I had to do, because it was a job. I needed money. I had to take a job. So, but they know whether you're one of them or not. They know it. They can feel it. And I knew they could feel it. I was over at Disney meeting with the biggest of the biggest, you name it. I was at every studio, every independent producer, everybody from Roger Corman, the king of the B movies, as he was called, to the big shots at Paramount and Columbia and all the rest, private lunches, everything else. And I learned early on that there's an unspoken, unverbalized ritual, if you will, in which the gates will open for you, or they will not, because they want to know, are you going to play the game the way they want it played, period. Well, so I had already learned how to deal with this in Hollywood. So when I went to Manhattan to meet with the top people at Fox concerning my getting my own Fox News Network television show, I had learned how to play this game with big media people in Hollywood, who, by the way, are far more ruthless than anybody in any business. Just so you know, I've been in all kinds of businesses, finances, all kinds. But the most ruthless business I've ever been in, bar none, was Hollywood. Because in Hollywood, you got the toxic mix of egos, sex, money, fame, power, but it's like godlike power. And so when you deal with the people in Hollywood, it doesn't mean they're the most brilliant people in the world. They're savagely ruthless, though. It makes up for their brilliance or lack of brilliance. They're savagely ruthless. So when I met with this guy in Fox, we've had a great conversation, but I knew that in the middle of this great conversation, it was like playing ping pong at a ping pong table. He was gathering his information. He already had a file and research on me, some of which I pre-selected and submitted, and some that he had his secretaries get. They had already watched what I could do on Fox News Network, but the door didn't open because they knew that I was, well, let's just say, steadfast and committed to my Christian beliefs in a way that was above the average lukewarm Christian. I mean, they wouldn't have used those terms at all. And they knew that I knew too much about the truth of the way the American system works and the financial system and how globalism works. They knew that. So this same process, this screening process that I'm talking about, when they brought in the same people that brought in mainstream media, those are the same people that brought in the alternative media. The same screening process that was developed for mainstream media is the exact same screening process that was developed for alternative media. So when you see these alternative media stars, don't be deceived. I'm not going to name his name. I forgot how I found it because there was a TikTok thing that flashed onto my Facebook page. And it was like a 3-minute video of a very famous alternative media star. You know his name. And then it showed me a picture of his house. And I don't want to say where the house was because it would give it away. I don't think most people are aware of the house, but he bought a mansion in a very cutting edge, bold. He obviously hired an incredible architect. And so he built a mansion in this very exotic environment in the United States of America. And this mansion is just like, wow. And the amount of money he spent to buy this mansion, and by the way, this is one of his mansions. He owns 2 mansions at least, maybe 3. And so he bought this mansion a number of years ago. So the bottom line is, you don't get that kind of money to buy that level of mansion in that level of location unless you cut the deal. Okay, so a lot of these people who have now and a lot of people who have now become the stars in alternative media, they were playing an entirely different game before alternative media was created. They were stars in television and the music business and comedy and other stuff. So as alternative media was being created, they were being prepped, they were being trained on how to speak the language, the nuances, the spiritual beliefs of the people that would be fleeing mainstream media for what would soon be called alternative media. And so you see, why do you think Alex Jones, where did he get the term the Great Awakening from? He's not a religious guy. I can't prove it. I strongly suspect it was me. Because at the time he came up with the Great Awakening, I was relatively unique among Christians in my massive usage of the terms the Great Awakening, the Third Great Awakening, and the Great Awakening. I was massively promotional in my usage of the terms. I was massively promotional in my usage of the Pilgrims and Puritans. and the American dream. All that rhetoric, which was very heavily Christian and borrowed from the Bible heavily and borrowed from the Pilgrims and Puritans heavily. At that time, this is going back at least 2 decades, at that time, I was one of the few, yes, the few people with a large media audience who was stamping those words and terms and ideas into the consciousness of millions of Christians and others in America. And it was met with such success, and the impact was so powerful that people in military intelligence, people in the intelligence industries, mimicked my verbiage, my symbols, and my content because it worked. So they cloned it. Now, I think Alex Jones does a lot of good things, and I'm not necessarily knocking him for doing that. I don't even know if I'm criticizing him for doing it. I'm simply saying that when I go back to that period of time, I don't recall anybody doing the kind of content that I did that would have reached him. And it not only reached him, it reached people everywhere. And one of the people that had a lot to do with that was Doug Hagman. Because when Doug Hagman would invite me on his show, he would give me an uninterrupted 3 hours. And sometimes we would go day after day after day. And we did this a lot on his show, the Hagman Report. And Doug had other guests like Steve Quayle, who massive impact, imitated like crazy. I'm sure he went through the same thing I went through. Steve Quayle had a massive impact. But there's a lot of people in alternative media now who cloned, who mimicked what they heard on Doug Hagman, or what they heard Steve Quayle say, or what they heard me say, or what they heard some of the others say, who were the first to hit the beach. So what I'm telling you is the deep state is very, very good at intelligence, psyops, psychological warfare, and so is Army military intelligence. Now, I can't tell you how I know everything that I know. I can't tell you that. I've heard Steve Quayle say the same thing, and I've heard Doug Hagman say the same thing. Because you just can't say how you know what you know, because you can figure that out, okay? You can figure that out. You don't need me to tell you. So now we have the Trojan horse. Alternative media is gaining ground. It'll eventually erode because like it or not, what alternative media does have going for it, even with all the problems that I've suggested regarding alternative media, it still contains a vastly higher percentage of truth within the content mix of alternative media than mainstream media ever did. And because there is, on the basis of a ratio percentage, a significant percentage of truth in all areas of life that was totally non-existent in mainstream media, that truth is bringing in listeners who are hungry for truth. That truth, no matter who delivers it, is a very good thing for America and the world. And that truth is powerful. It's transformational. So I'm not going to criticize everything of the Trojan horse because there's a lot of good coming out of it. Now, you have to recognize, though, that ultimately when the day is done, it is the agenda, it is the hidden agenda of the deep state, of various intelligence agencies here and in different places of the world. It is their goal to corral, like you corral a bunch of horses. Cowboys corral horses. And I'm not a cowboy, I'm from New York City. But, I've seen enough Western movies to see the cowboys twirl their lassos and grab a bull or a cow or whatever, and they corral them. They bring them in to a fenced area. Well, the intelligence agencies, the psyops experts, don't underestimate them. They have created a new box for you to think inside, and that new box to think inside is known as alternative media, which I believe will eclipse mainstream media in its influence. So what they've done is they have self-negotiated. They imitated the work I did and others did. I mean, like ruthless whores, for crying out loud. And I'm sorry if that offends you, but you try being a communicator and you see your work, your life's work, literally stolen. And you can live with that, but stolen and then used very cleverly, very stealth-like. They use the language, the symbols, the history, the rationale that you're communicating with, and they bend it and they tweak it and they twist it just a little here, a little there, and a little here, so that they can mold it and shape it into a deadly force of propaganda and mind control, with the agenda and the philosophy going along with it, that if we want to retain our power, it's better for us to let go of the reins of power a little bit, let mainstream media dissipate into a pile of dust, if need be, and let there be some explosion of truth, explosion of conservatism, celebration of capitalism, some re-embracing of biblical values to whatever degree. Let some of that happen, because it's better to let some of that happen and still control your target audience, still own them, still enslave them, and still control them by making them think you set them free, and making them believe the lie that alternative media is a living example of their so-called freedom. See, the name of the game for them is stay in control by any means necessary. So if they have to play that they've become a little bit more moderate, then they're going to play that game. But don't be sucker punched, because the end game for alternative media is the same as the end game for mainstream media. And the end game is codified in the language of the people that own both mainstream media and alternative media, and that is the Great Reset people, the billionaire, trillionaire, globalist elite that want to create what they call a Great Reset, which is nothing more than a rebranding of the term the New World Order. That end game is solidly in place in the voices and the overwhelming percentage of people that communicate via alternative media. And you really got to be savvy. You really got to step up your game and develop a heightened sensitivity and an enhanced perception to grasp the nature of the battle that we're in. Now, I do this, and I'm not going to play a violin for you. I'm just going to simply tell you that I know and I act and I function like the truth that I know, which is I know that we are in, right now, the greatest spiritual war in the history of mankind, the greatest battle for the hearts and minds of mankind in the history of the world. This is the epicenter of it. Now, Bible prophecy is being fulfilled. But the takeaway for Bible prophecy being fulfilled is that we should be occupying until I come. Jesus comes. Now, that simply means is don't even think about preaching the gospel, winning souls to Jesus Christ, because if you're not at least minimally occupying the land that God told you to occupy, there will be no freedom. There will be no social freedom. There will be no spiritual freedom, because the deep state has not retreated from their target, which is to eradicate freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of the press. So whether you like it or not, if you say you're a Christian, then the Holy Spirit has to be inside you. If the Holy Spirit is not inside you, then you need to examine yourself and deeply question as to whether or not the Holy Spirit is inside you. If the Holy Spirit is inside you, you're going to have an overwhelming, energizing, propelling force, the dunamis, moving inside you, and you can do nothing less than be the spiritual warrior that God called you to be in good times or bad times. Now, because I tell the truth, I don't get those juicy, lucrative flows of massive amounts of advertising dollars. I don't get it. They don't give it to me. Why? Because I dare to warn about certain medical procedures that are killing people by the millions. And for that, they will chop my head off, literally, from being on certain social media channels. Or I might bring up some other truth that is literally a life and death situation for you, your children, and grandchildren. And for that, I'm demonetized, deplatformed, and in a heartbeat, they will behead me. They will behead me so I can't talk anymore. That's the price of telling the truth. The people that are seducing you in the magical land of Oz, known as alternative media, most of them, not all of them, but most of them, they have sold out. Listen carefully to the content. Don't be superficially played. And you can help me continue to wage spiritual war and spread the light as fast as we can by going to paulmcguire.us, that's paulmcguire.us, and donate or give as your conscience and as the Lord and the Holy Spirit compels you to. Whatever it is that God is compelling you to do when you go to paulmcguire.us, then quit fighting with God and do what he tells you to do, because we are all going to reap what we sow. And you can donate safely at paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. Also, we need your prayers and we need your activism, because we're in a war for the truth. God bless you. This is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us.